someone came back and was like, well, I don't think it's our job to educate friends how to be a good friend. And like, it's just not our job. And just being like very just aggressive about it. And I was just like,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that you need to do that as you're grieving. I'm just saying that take a pause, like maybe breathe through this and think about like, are they coming from a good place or are they being a bad friend?
Welcome to Grief City.
Don't know how we ended up here. Blue sky, sunshine, it was all clear. I'm surrounded by all my worst fears. Yeah, it feels like a ghost
And
town.
remember, if this is your first visit, you are not alone.
Welcome to the Grief City podcast. I'm your host, Nuella, and I am so grateful to have you here today. So today's episode is extra special because I get to be joined by Kendel and Rachel from the Two Girls with Grief podcast. Hello, ladies, and welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, I think I came across you guys, I think it was TikTok is where we first encountered one another. And I think you had like commented on a video. And I think you were just starting the podcast at this point. But it's been so cool to see just the work you guys are doing through your podcast and the things you're sharing about loss. So I just think it's amazing. And I know you guys are really breaking stigmas in the loss community and just bringing so much encouragement to others. So I think it's amazing what you guys are doing. Today's episode, I wanted to talk about the challenges that can sometimes come with finding community and support and friendship after loss. I know myself, I am for sure an introvert, and that's something like I process a lot of things more internally, and that's something that's been tough for me after loss. And I've just thought like seeing you guys and seeing your friendship, it's just so cool to see how you cultivated such a deep friendship and you cultivated that community. So I just felt like there was like nobody better to talk to about this topic than you guys.
Well, I really give
Kendel.
a testament to Rachel in that she has really put in a lot of effort and time and energy to build our support group, but the community through the podcast as well. She cares so much about this and cares about breaking down these stigmas and having these conversations. So I'm happy to be like supporting this, to be friends with Rachel, to also like watch our friendship bloom through the podcast. But it's been a fun journey, despite that we're talking about super sad topics.
Yeah, it's truly incredible. You guys have been, I can tell you're working hard on it. You're working hard on building that community, and it's just really special to watch it all unfold.
Thanks. Yeah. And it's nice because I feel like me and Kendel bring such different energies to it as well. So it's like different perspectives, different insights. And it's just great to like also share, I think, our experiences and like building friendship, and something that like obviously we built like together through our friendship and like meeting in a grief support group. And I think it's really helpful to other people that are feeling really lonely in their grief to see that as well. Like we just met last year and we've done a lot together, and, we really grown in our friendship. And I think that's important to see, especially if people feel really lonely and just like no one gets it. Just like hope that there are people that get it. You just have to open yourself up to that situation and put yourself in a position to meet those people.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get into talking about community, what that has looked like for you guys, and maybe some of the wins and challenges you faced with that, I'd love to have you both share a little bit about who you're missing, what's brought you into your grief journey.
Kendel, do you want to go first? Yours is a little shorter, a little bit.
Yeah. Unfortunately, what brought me on my grief journey was losing my dad in 2020. And he was a phenomenal father and a solid stable parent in my life. Rachel and I have talked a lot about what it's like to caregive for family members who are sick and having to devote a part of your youth in a time when you're probably not ready to take on literal life and death situations. And that was my case with my dad, was being his power of attorney, and then later on the executor of his estate, and trying to figure this all out in my early 20s. And it's something I felt very lost in and didn't have a lot of guidance on how do you do that at a young age. In this journey, I realized nobody knows how to do it at any age, whether you're 50 or 70. It's still such a hard experience to have to balance caregiving for the people you love and watching them slowly kind of break down. And that alone is its own type of grief. But then also, how do you pick up the pieces of a family, or how do you get paperwork together so you can sign the things you need to sign? So I think that's the perspective that I bring to our podcast, is that lens of being an oldest daughter and having to take on that responsibility, particularly when I didn't feel ready to.
So for me, it's different. I'm actually the youngest child of my family. So me and Kendel have very different experiences with that. I also lost my dad, and he's who passed away first. And then about like maybe a year and a half later, my sister passed away. And then almost basically 2 years exactly, my mom passed away. So I just experienced too much loss. I think any loss is too much, but for a majority of my family, I have one sibling left. So I think through doing the podcast and everything has been really helpful to even just like process the type of loss and like the amount of loss and how big that is. Because a lot of people, you hear people share about like the loss of one loss and how hard that is, right? And I think it's important to share like it's the loss of 3 people, because I think I had a hard time sharing that, but also admitting it to myself how hard that was, of just like missing majority of my family. So I think by doing this podcast and meeting more people and seeing other people share their stories and people understanding like, okay, their experience with loss is hard. I'm still even trying to figure out like, how do I explain the loss of like 3 people? Because I don't like comparing like, oh, my loss is worse or anything like that. Like, I think you lose one person, that's the worst thing in the world. Like, you shouldn't have to live your life without the people that you love. But I think it's helped me kind of process like, this is a little bit more unusual, and you need to give yourself credit for just like how hard it is. And I think that was something that I've had a hard time with, is just like, you've been through a lot. You can give yourself a little bit of like leeway and pat on the back for what you're going through. So, but it's just been an interesting experience to like learn from each other and our grief and our stories, and like just understand it, because any grief is hard. Any loss is hard. And I'm still figuring it out.
Yeah. Thank you both for bravely sharing. I know talking about your loss, but then also talking about it publicly can just be a whole nother thing. And it's a very brave thing you're doing. So I'm so sorry for your losses, but I am thankful that we have the gift to be able to connect with one another and build community, even out of the darkest kinds of situations. What did the early days of support look like for you guys? You just met a little over a year ago, you said, correct?
Not even a year ago. Yeah, I think it's less than a year.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, so what did
I think it was like July or something.
Oh my goodness. So almost a year. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. So what did those early days look like for you after those losses initially?
Sorry, were you saying after we met each other or after the initial loss?
After your initial loss, like what did a support system look like for you? Was one there? Was it non-existent?
For me, for my loss, I had like 3 different losses in like a 4-year period. It was a 4-year period. And I think for me, I was really resistant to support in a lot of ways, because I was like very independent, and like I think it also differed. Like when I had lost my dad, I still had my mom and my sister, so I had like support there. And then it's like my sister passed away, and then that was really hard for my mom. So I feel like I almost also lost her support in a way because she was having a hard time with it. And then my mom passed away. And so I think it was very different because like when my dad passed away, it's obviously very hard, but I still had like such a good, the core support. And then as they left, I think that's also what I had a hard time accepting, was like, it's not just losing them, but it's like you're losing the support to get through it each time as someone keeps passing away. So I think for me, I kept it very separate. Like I didn't really go to my friends for it. I like didn't really like sharing what I was feeling. And so I think it was only more recently that I like have accepted support, but also seeked it out more. So like there were friends that I kind of asked for things here and there, and you know, friends disappoint you or they show up and you have a lot of friendship changes. But for me, I think I just try to like kind of internalize it all and try to like be okay. And I didn't really share it with people. And it's very recent that that's not the case, where I've actually like, I'll say things to my friends, or I'll mention things, or I'll open up about it. And that wasn't something that I used to do at all. I used to just like keep it very separate and kind of be like, that the grief part of me is very separate than myself. So yeah, it's very recent that that wasn't the case. I like felt like I could just take it on myself and not really share it with people.
Wow, that's so, it's because I feel like my journey has been so similar of keeping it very internal. You know, I'd share with my husband, but internally processing so much just because naturally that would be my go-to, because I'm not, you know, I have a few really, really good friends and that's it. But I just think about, you know, I always think how grief itself can be so incredibly lonely and isolating. And then just to like feel like, in a way, it's you're like shutting that part off and not even sharing that with anyone else. And then also the element of so many family members are gone that were your support system. That's just such an incredibly difficult thing. Such a difficult thing. What about you, Kendel?
Yeah.
What did that look like for you early on?
I had a very close support system. In one way, I had my best friends come together and rally for me and really made sure that I was still invited to do things. That's something Rachel and I talked a lot about as grievers. You kind of stop getting invited to things because people are like, oh, well, they're going to say no anyways. But the two friends that I had constantly made sure and let me know that like they wanted me there, and whatever state I might have been in, that was okay. I had to reunite my brother and sister. Our family was very fractured prior to my dad's passing. And then after his passing, it just became more, just more tense, more disintegrated. And so it's weird because 5 years later, we look like a very different family than we did. We have to rely on each other now. There's this dependency that we don't have anybody else to help us with it. So it's kind of like, I keep saying like, we're in this ship together. We're in this boat together. So one of us has a problem. We're all going to work on fixing that. And then the other aspect was, I really do give a testament to my aunt and uncle. My father was the youngest of my aunts and uncles. And when he passed, I think it was very hard on them to watch their younger brother leave, and them having to dissect their own grief while also thinking like, we have to take care of his kids now. Like there's 3 kids without strong parents in their lives, and how are we going to step in and help them? And I try to remind myself often, because I love them both dearly, but they are great representations that they are also dealing with different types of grief. They're grieving a younger brother. They're grieving their parents who have passed on before them in unfair ways as well. And so, you know, they're trying to help me through my first really large loss in life, like a life-changing loss, while also having to bring up and dig through those emotions of their parents' loss. And that affects and trickles down to the loss of my dad. And it's complicated. Loss brings up a lot of complex emotions. And it's easy for us to say on a podcast or on a TV show that, it's just like one loss. But Rachel can tell you, like, you lose the same person every day. You're dealing with that loss all the time. And Rachel can also tell you, like, this compounded grief brings up grief of other things in your life. And so to get back to the point, like, I had a great support system, but I wasn't really open about talking about it yet at the time in those early days. That took time to get to.
Wow. Yeah, that's so powerful to have those people that can be there and support. I had I feel like the same like you, and Rachel, you probably experienced this, I would imagine, after your dad passed away. It gets kind of tricky because, like, other family members are all going through their own thing. Yeah. And it's like, you can feel frustration, but at the same time, you can't blame them because it's just so difficult. So that's really special. You had your aunt and uncle, even though they were struggling with that, and feeling the weight of their own loss, to step in and still try to support you as well. So you guys met at the dinner party, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
So I'm curious, since this wasn't that long ago, and you both had like your own struggles of not wanting to really talk about grief and having your own struggles of finding that friendship kind of support, what like brought you to the point of wanting to seek out further support and wanting to find like be a part of a grief group or something like that?
For me, it was starting 2024 and just realizing like I wasn't doing enough for my grief, and just realizing like I was trying to do different things. I was trying to figure out like, what do I want my life to look like? And realizing I just haven't tried enough. And I feel like you should always try different things when it comes to grief, because you just really don't know what will help. And so I decided like I will try a grief support group. And I was very anti sharing stories with strangers type of thing. So I joined one, and it really wasn't a fit. I feel like it was the people that were very reactive and just very snippy with grief.
Oh, no.
Like they weren't very supportive, and just like, I had just brought up, I remember in the conversation that like, it's hard being a friend, also supporting someone through grief. And sometimes it's not so black and white. Like sometimes I think that we should have a little grace with people that are trying to support some people, support you as a friend, because grief is just really hard. And we're reactive and tensions are high. Like it's just a hard thing to do. So sometimes I think, I just said that when people were talking about friendships, and someone came back and was like, well, I don't think it's our job to educate friends how to be a good friend. And like, it's just not our job. And just being like very just aggressive about it. And I was just like, I'm not saying that you need to do that as you're grieving. I'm just saying that take a pause, like maybe breathe through this and think about like, are they coming from a good place, or are they being a bad friend? And that's two different things. If they're coming from a good place, it might not execute correctly, or they're just being a bad friend that's not showing any care, empathy, love for a hard time. That's totally different things. But to feel like someone automatically knows how to do that, I think that part needs to be talked about more. Like it's not, like you just don't know. And so I just really didn't like the energy of that group, and just how like, how people were acting. And so I almost stopped there, but then I found the dinner party and I looked and there wasn't any group. So I decided to join a training to start my own. And that's actually where I met Kendel, was in the training. We both like signed up to do training.
Okay.
And it ended up, so that's like where we first met. And then Kendel, I think I launched my room like the day as soon as like I could, because they make you do 2 trainings, and Kendel signed up. And so like she was already a familiar face when she joined the dinner party, or my dinner party. But but yeah, I think that way it also helped me kind of create the space that I wanted, that like people should be nice to each other and try to be supportive instead of being snappy with each other. And and so that ended up being a really good experience. It's just being able to like share with people and build friendship and build camaraderie with people that get it. I didn't realize that I needed a space to just share feelings with people that like didn't know my people, and you can just share it how you feel. And I think that is an important piece, because sometimes with family or friends, they have their own opinions and you say something and it becomes more personal, or just because there's so many other emotions involved, sometimes it's hard to have conversations and really share everything that you're feeling, because you're worried about hurting other people's feelings or maybe making them feel a certain way or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's just a nice outlet to like share without ever feeling like, okay, they're going to be like, well, but your mom is like this or something, like you could just share and get people's feedback on just like the loss itself and those feelings, and kind of people just like affirming things that you feel that you didn't get that before from people that are too close to the situation. So it was a big change, but I definitely, I'm glad that I decided to do it and like put myself out there. But yeah, it is definitely scary to do that and like join a group or lead a group and be like, let's talk about the worst days of our life.
Yeah. That's amazing you guys met in training. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought for some reason it was maybe just in one of like the meetups you met, but that's really cool. What about you, Kendel? Like, what brought you to the point you're like, I'm going to join this dinner party thing. I'm going to set up my own, like, I'm going to train and set up my own room and stuff like that.
Yeah, I came to the conclusion that I needed a support group type grief environment after going to a book club. And Rachel and I have a whole nother podcast and are running theories about how reading is so instrumental to confronting your grief and learning more about yourself while you're grieving. And that's a whole separate conversation. But it was in the book club where there was 4 other women across different walks of life, and one of them had just lost their mother. And we all found out as she was sharing with us that we had all lost a parent or parents. And it was kind of this unifying feeling to, I call it like back before kind of bringing grief into my life. I felt like grief was the little monster I was trying to hide from the world and shoving it in the corner and trying to hide it and be like, no, don't look at the ugly part of that. But talking to these women, I was like, oh, they see my grief and it's not scary to them. In fact, I feel better talking about it. I feel really united, and that feeling of community came through. And I drove home that night and I was like, you've done the therapy, you've done the medication, like I'm to a better point in my grief, but I was like, I still clearly need to talk about these feelings or these thoughts that I have with people who understand grief. And that night I was Googling and found the dinner party. And I wanted to take a little bit of a different direction being in Texas with the dinner party that I was wanting to do. But finding the training and then meeting Rachel, and when I saw that she put hers on, I was like, I should probably attend one before I put my own on. And so I sat on Rachel's and I was like, I wonder if she would be happy to like have somebody who kind of knows her story a little bit, kind of went through this training with her, kind of just like a friend. And I was like, I'll just be a cheerleader. And if things get awkward, I can chime in and help. But I was like, I just want this to be a really good like first experience for not only the people attending, but also Rachel, who's leading these groups. And Rachel is a community leader through and through. She does this in other aspects of her life. This is a natural gift and strength of hers in the world. And so, you find your community leaders. And if you're not the community leader and that's not natural to you, like I'm an introvert as well. So seeing this as a strength of Rachel's, I think it's incredible. But I can also support her and help her and, help her make things great and seamless if I can. And that's one way I think people, whether it's grief or other aspects of like what people are interested in, find your community leaders, and you can have your strength used somewhere. You know, Rachel is a strong community leader. She has this beautiful output into the world. And I say people who are trying to do that too, but they may not be the strong, outspoken person in their community. Then, you know, ask them how they can help. How can you be involved? How can you put your own strengths, your unique gifts that you have out there in the world? So whatever you're interested in or supporting, in our case, it's grief, but if it's advocacy, I mean, this is one way to heal communities, heal yourself. And so that kind of what led me to the support group to begin with. I think also to note that I tried religious support groups because that was all that I could find locally in my area. And I think that's great for a lot of people who need that. For myself, I wanted more introspection with people and their experience rather than kind of scripture being said to me, or just the idea of like relying on faith, because right after my loss, I was really struggling with a lot of my faith, and it just wasn't helping me in that specific time. And so if you are looking for a support group and you are, you know, very faith driven, that's a great space to look at. But if you're not, I think the dinner party is one of these spaces where it's more faith agnostic, more diverse and inclusive of other differences, experiences. I like that the dinner party has affinity groups, because if you are someone in the LGBT community, your grief is going to look different than, say, a cis heterosexual person. And it's great to find those people and share those experiences. If you're a person of color, there's affinity groups for that. So you can really dial down into different aspects of grief that can arise through different communities.
I just love hearing how you guys got to find each other through this. You know, speaking of when you were talking moment about, yeah, when you were talking about, excuse me, faith, like faith-driven grief groups. I remember, so I never went to, because I've been a Christian my whole life, like raised in a church, and I'm sure you guys have seen me share about like faith and loss, and that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day. But I remember one of the first like gatherings I went to, probably about 5 or 6 months after losing my dad. I started getting back into church. I was like, okay, I'm going to try to like do this again. And a girl that I was sitting next to each week, she's like, you should come to this women's Bible study group on Sunday nights. And I'm like, denying it a few times. I'm like, no, I'm okay. And then I was like, okay, I'll go. And I remember that night, it was like all round circle kind of conversations. And that evening, at the end, or I should say at the end of the discussion time, they asked like a question of like, something like, how has God like met you and like lifted your shame kind of thing. And like after my dad died, I was dealing with a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, and a lot of issues with that. But I had started reaching a point of finding some healing there, and they came to me. Like I said, introverted. I'm the kid that please don't call on me in school. I don't want to give an answer to anything. And I remember they came to me and I started sharing. And I started sharing about my dad and how I felt like God had started lifting this shame and healing. And I just started becoming this blubbering mess. And I was just bawling my eyes out in front of this group of women that I didn't know. And at the end of like me sharing, someone gets on the stage and is like, okay, we're going to wrap up, ladies. Like this really brutal interruption. And then they're just sitting there staring at me like, okay, like they don't know what to say. And I guess I'm just bringing that up because I think people mean so well in faith grieving groups, but it's so tough because it's like, you don't want to hear scripture. You don't want to hear these feel good sayings. Like, you just want to be heard and seen and understood. But along those lines, like, you know, that night for me, it was really hard. I was really humiliated. I never went back to that group again.
Oh.
But and they were
why.
all I know, and they were all so kind. It was nothing, you know, terrible they said or anything, but it was just embarrassing for me. And when you come into a new situation of meeting someone new, or it's like a new grief group, or even just you guys getting to interact with one another, like, how has that felt beginning to share? Like, do you feel like you were oversharing, or do you feel like you were needing to withhold information for a while? Like, I guess just that process of learning to trust someone with your grief and being okay with sharing. Like, what did that look like for you?
For me, it's very recent of sharing my grief. And now I just feel comfortable sharing stories and sharing experiences.
Yeah.
I think it's still always interesting when you meet new people to share that information. And it's also interesting to like meet new people and like you don't really talk about it, or you meet in social circles, but like you follow each other on socials. And so like people may see things about you, right? Like you post or you share, and they'll find information about you, whether you tell them directly or not. So I think there is that interesting part of like, what do you tell people that you're like friends with, but not super close with, about your grief? Kendel talks about this a lot, and we talk about like, you can always lie to people if you don't feel comfortable sharing. Sometimes you just don't want to, right? It's like if you're just meeting someone in casual and people, because things that come up, even like dating or anything, it's like, oh, where are your parents? How many siblings do you have?
Yeah.
And like, it's like mic drop, you know. And I took very different stance, especially with like dating, of like, do you just either sound like super evasive, like you're avoiding all information and you sound like you have a big secret, you know, or do you just say it? And it's like, especially on a first date, it's like, it's a lot of information. Granted, it will kind of tell you like what kind of guy he is, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where it's hard. It's just to meet people and you're like, oh, and the people always want to like, I'm so sorry, you know, or say something. And it's just like, you don't always need that, especially from a stranger. Like, you don't need like someone to tell you again, like, oh my God, that's really hard. Oh, I'm so sorry. You know, because you're kind of like, I know that, I deal with that on a daily. And sometimes it doesn't feel as sincere, or like, or even just like, I don't know. It's like you're putting someone in a situation to like say all these things that they don't even know what to say. So sometimes it's hard. You decide like, do I want to deal with this or not? Do I want to potentially cry? Do I want to lie or cry? Is like the line. Like we don't know, right? Like I feel like I can get through saying a lot of stuff without crying, but sometimes you just like, you'll say something and it'll be like, oh crap, you know, like
just hits
I'll start
you.
crying, and it just it just hits you. You don't know. You could say the same thing 100 times, and then on the 100 and like first time, like you'll cry, right? You just like, you don't know what would happen. And so I think in certain situations, I'm getting better to like when I want to say it, or just feel confident in what I want to share when I want to share it. But I think there's also a beauty of like sharing things with people and like getting to know somebody differently. And I think like that was something with Kendel where like we talked about the hardest things before we knew anything else about each other. You know, like you talk about the hardest points in your life and the situations. So you're kind of like on this level of like, okay, I don't even like, you know, it's like, I don't know you had siblings at the point or anything. Like, I don't know where you're located. I just knew like, you know, all these different stories about your dad, you know, and it's weird to come from like, maybe that's the last thing, or people don't even know, to like, I know that first. And then I'm like getting to know you as a person, you know, like who you are beyond like your grief stories. So it sets up friendships very differently when you're like, I know you in such a deep level. And it was something when I met Kendel, I think it was probably like 2 weeks or something after we started talking about creating the podcast. And Kendel said she was like proud of me about something. And then I just remember like, I was reading her message and then like it made me cry. And then I told her that it made me cry, but like in a way like, oh wow, that really hit me, that like missing that feeling of people telling you that they're proud of you, but you feel like it's actually for something real and something that like they actually see you for. Because when you're keeping like your grief self and your other self like separate, it feels like when people say things, it just feels like it's not, and not like not enough, but it's just like it doesn't necessarily feel like it's in the way that like, okay, you really see everything that's going on. And so
Yeah.
and it was just a nice moment of like, okay, I actually feel comfortable telling Kendel like this made me cry, but like, you know, like I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate like that you see like the grief side of me and the other pieces of me. And I wouldn't normally tell people like, oh, you just made me cry, you know, whether they did or not. And it wasn't like, it was like a nice cry. It was like, oh, I just didn't realize I was missing this type of cry. So it is nice, but there's, it's just like so many different levels of like people that you meet and who you connect with. And you won't connect with everyone about your grief, and you won't feel safe to share enough or like a lot with everybody. And I think that's totally fine. I think you have to look at every person and every situation differently, but then also like not worry about making people uncomfortable about your grief, because like it's just your life. So people are going to have to get used to it eventually.
I love that. Yeah, it's so true. What about you, Kendel?
Yeah. Can you remind me the question again?
Yeah. Um, I know when it's like two people giving responses to things, it's like hard to remember. So I was talking about like how do you kind of like overcome like feeling like, am I oversharing, or like how do I know if like, is this a safe space, like things like that? What kind of, I guess, how did you know, and we can go into this further too, but like how did you know with like Rachel that was, she's a safe space for me and like I can share and not be judged?
Yeah. Thank you for repeating it. I was like so entranced with Rachel's response. I was like, I forgot the question.
I know, it was beautiful.
It was. From the get-go in the support group, Rachel and I, and maybe one or two other people, were quote unquote older in their grief, not necessarily older in age, but further away from kind of the loss event. So we've had some time to process things, and we're in a different processing time of grief than we were a lot of the other people in our support group. We never name names of anybody, but I would say 75% of the group were, if not weeks, maybe some months after their loss. And Rachel and I always, I mean, we talk about that still of like, man, that's really inspiring that these people took so much agency and awareness of their grief that they knew they needed support very early on, where that was not my experience diving in. For myself, what had happened in my grief is, I mentioned it, like the little monster in the corner, is like I separated myself from my grief, that to go forth in my life, to do my job, to be a good sister, to do all these things I wanted to do, I was going to have to separate that sad part of me. And that's what I did for a couple years. And then meeting Rachel, finding the support group, I began to reevaluate how I processed my grief. And instead of putting it into its own isolated bucket where I dealt with it only in therapy, I began to integrate it into who I am. Like grief is, unfortunately, like Rachel said, it's a part of our story, but we're also more than just grief. We're more than just the sad events that have happened to us. And so the more I found that I would begin to like stitch this back together, I now kind of see my grief as like, it's a shadow or a scar that is always there. And I remember it, or it pops up at random times unexpectedly, but I can talk about it now without breaking down in tears. And that was not the beginning of our podcast. If you listen to the first few episodes, I am a warbly crying mess on those first couple episodes. But realizing Rachel has so much compassion and empathy around everybody's different stance with grief. We've had a lot of interesting very like profound conversations about grief in our lives, but then grief in society and grief in our culture. How do you see grief as a friend? All this stuff, and trying to look at it through all these different angles. Even in our last season on the podcast, we brought on a lot of people who had very, very different grief experiences than us. In a lot of ways, Rachel and I can't. We might relate to them in a grief experience and losing people, but a lot of them had experiences where we didn't lose somebody the same way, or we haven't lost that type of person in our lives. And it just adds another angle to grief that we should be having more conversations around. But we are very shy as a Western country about grief. I think it's great that more recently, more people are taking kind of the control in their hands and releasing more grief resources or grief channels of conversation and communication. I like what Rebecca Feinglass said on our show of that. We need so much more grief resources out there. We should all be sharing this to build that community stronger so we can all understand how to support grievers better. But to go back to the point around finding that safe space, it's funny because in our support group, we're a grief support group and people have just experienced loss. So of course there's going to be tears and confusion and anger, and people would begin to cry and they're like, I'm so sorry, I'm crying. And every time it's like, you're in a grief group. All of us are crying. It's okay. Like, if you're going to cry to anybody, we're the people to cry to, because we all know what you're going through. We're going through that actively, or Rachel and I can look at that and like, we understand that space because we have been in that space for years. And so, I think the people who really find value will stay and add and participate. And the people who are like, okay, I got what I needed, dropped off and pursuing, their grief in a different journey, that's also great. But I look at not even realizing that I needed like a grief friend, but having someone who understands like the intricacies of my grief. I understand the complexities of her grief, and that we can share this pretty openly. But yeah, back to Rachel's point that we knew each other through our grief first. And then we've been able to learn more about each other throughout time has gone on. So I can see her. I'm like, I know she organizes volleyball, and I'm like, what an amazing thing to give to your community and things that you're giving back to your city and the people around you. Like, that's such a cool thing. But I didn't meet Rachel through volleyball. I see Rachel through her complexities of what she's going through on a daily basis. But then I can now see all the good that she spreads out into the world as well.
When I lost my dad, every single day I felt unmotivated and stuck. Sing text helped me gently move forward, and it gave me a small sense of purpose each day. Singing has always been therapeutic for me, but after loss, it became essential for my mental well-being. Getting a daily text with my guided vocal training reminded me to take 15 minutes to do something good for myself. SingText is my company, and it's also what makes this podcast possible. If you love singing and you want support for your voice and you want that creative outlet in your grief, SingText is here for you. Try it with a 14-day pass for $5 at singtextofficial.com. See how your voice feels and see how singing can support your healing. So, I don't know about you guys, but this was early on in my loss. After I lost my dad, a friend of mine who I'm actually going to have on an episode soon, who had a very similar loss as me, she, several months later, her dad passed as well. And I remember she reached out and she said, hey, any wisdom you have, tell me anything, blah, blah, blah. Because I think I don't know about you guys, but I know after I lost my father, I wasn't looking for friendship, but I was looking for resources, and I was looking to fix the problem. You learn that there's nothing that can be fixed eventually. And I just remember saying to her, because I was so early on in my grief. I didn't want to spew my pain and my hurt on her or anything like that. But I just remember saying to her, like, the best thing someone shared with me after I lost my dad is just, you need to like feel these emotions, however you need to feel them. And you need to let yourself grieve however you need to grieve. Now, have you guys, like, doing grief groups and getting to encounter other grievers, and now that you're further out from those initial losses, how do you find yourselves supporting like people fresh in their grief? How do you find, like, what are things that you have found to be helpful and like productive when trying to like literally be a support group, but also just support them?
That's something that we've actually talked about in our grief support group, because I think often when people have a hard time is how you're supported by people that you love, and feeling disappointed and all these different things by people. And we talked about it, and I was like, okay, well, how would you want to be supported? What would be the perfect way for you to be supported? And like, how do you feel is the perfect way to support somebody? And I just remember that no one had answers. Like, no one really had any answers. And I think that was a good moment for people to kind of, in a sense, like check yourself of that. Like, if you're experiencing grief and you still don't know the perfect way, then maybe think about it on the outside too. And like bridging that gap a little bit. Obviously when you're in the thick of it, it's like, it's hard to have any of those conversations or even really digest that and think about it. Like, it's probably something you should like circle back with once you've dealt with things a little bit more. I think in initial stages of grief, it's like, it's hard, right? Because I've seen people say that like they didn't want anyone to talk to them ever. They didn't want anyone to bring it up or mention it. And it just really depends on the person. And I think that's what's so hard about giving like advice of like, how do you help a griever? And we always say like, this helped us, so maybe it'll help you, but you know your griever best. And I think that's an important thing to mention, because something that worked for me might not work for somebody else. And you have to know your person to know like, what are they going to do or how are they going to accept it? I think just coming to somebody, like just showing that you're there and actually showing up and like being there, whether that's like I think something that Kendel does is like send gift certificates or like send like Venmos or whatever for like coffee, food, whatever. That's something like Kendel mentioned that she does. And I remember like when my friend had lost her mom recently, like I sent her money to go get like food, you know? So like you learn from each other, like, oh, that would actually be nice, and do that. But for me, it's just like keeping them active. So I think for me, it's just showing people love, and you kind of have to know whether like they want you to just spend time with them, whether you want them to like, you want to create a space for them to be able to talk about it or share or let them cry or hold them or whatever. I think you have to know the person to know what they would need specifically. But I think just showing up, I think that's the most important part, even if it doesn't land well, even if it might cause some friction. Like, you won't ever regret showing up for somebody, but you will regret not showing up for them. So whatever that looks like, at least you know that you tried. And maybe that's something that like maybe they need space, and you'll come back, or you'll just let them know that you're there or whatever. It's a very imperfect system, but I think just showing somebody love, you won't ever regret that. But how they want that love is going to depend on the person.
Yeah. I think always, I don't know if you guys experience this too, but after, you know, if it's a friend of mine or someone in the family I know that has lost someone, there's always this initial like, my heart, it like aches so bad for you, because you know like how painful it feels, like that initial loss, and you want to share everything you can and do everything you can for them. But I think you're so right, Rachel. It's just like everyone's so different in how they process. Like when my husband and we lost our dog, which I'm not comparing that to a loss of a human, but you know, he is like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to look at photos of the dog. And I'm just like all in my feels and I want to talk about everything. But it's like every griever is just so different. And I think it's so powerful and important to like being intuitive to that.
Yeah. I don't think comparing ever lands well, but I do think that like justice for pet loss, like I've lost most of my family. So like my dog is like the person, the thing that like I spend the most time with him, right? Like he brings me joy. He wants to be with me all the time. He hates when I'm gone. He loves me so much. Like he's just he's the thing that like smiles at me every day, you know, like keeps me happy, like brings joy to me. So for me, it's like, some people might only connect with dogs, right? Some people may never experience that type of love from another human. Like that's very real. Even in like the experience of like losing family members, and it's like my dog is a person that's with me all the time, you know, like he's the one that like I usually hold when I'm crying. Like you know, like there's that closeness to my dog. And so no, I'm not going to tell somebody I know what you lost because I lost my dog or whatever. Knock on wood, he's living forever.
Yes, he
but
is.
It's like I get that love, you know, and I think some people downplay it. It's like, you just don't know the relationship with anybody. Also, I do have human loss that I can like speak on. So it's not like I'm just talking out of my butt, but like I think, you know, animal loss is hard. They're with you 24/7. They love you. All they do is love you. You know, that's all they do. That's their job, is to love you. So I think it's one of those things that, that's such a big loss for people to like not have that 24/7 shadow and like love.
Oh yeah.
So justice for the pets, because they're doing their work.
They are. I know my dog, after my dad died, was like my little buddy companion, and just such a, it's so funny how an animal, sorry, rabbit trail moment. It's so funny how an animal doesn't say a word, but they are just this steady, sweet little best buddy. They're just so, they're such a gift, such a gift. You know, I've heard it said before, like grievers, you know, or I guess I should put it this way. Not every person, and we kind of talked about this a little bit before, like not every person is going to be a right fit for you. Like, and I should say griever to griever kind of support system. Not every other griever will be the best support system to you. And sometimes you can kind of egg each other on, or you can just leave that relationship when you hang out like feeling horrible and down. Or maybe they didn't make space for you to share your grief, things like that. And then even like the comparison thing can come into play. And that's just not the best thing to open, not a good can of worms to open, I guess I should say, because no grief can really be compared to another. Every grief is so nuanced. But when you guys were meeting each other, what made you like, what were qualities in one another that made you feel like, wow, I feel supported here, and this feels like a really healthy, healing kind of friendship to have in my life?
Go ahead, Kendel, because I answered last.
For me, befriending Rachel, one that she experienced so much grief. So it was something we talked about really early on, and that I was like, you know, I feel like maybe I don't have as much to say about grief because you have experienced so much grief, and like these are all very close relationships, and you've been grieving longer. And she went back to like very firm on the stance of like, no, we cannot be comparing grief. Like your grief is just as important. Your relationship to your dad is just as important. And that there's still stuff to be learned and stuff to be shared about this. And so I appreciate that Rachel is very firm on that fact that loss looks very different based on the people we lose and how they're lost. And that adds to a culmination of like different feelings to that. I think it's why she has made such a great host on the podcast, and really dialing it down as we get better at podcasting and interviewing people in the last season of exploring the grief that everybody carries and how that kind of adds to this larger picture and conversation we should be having culturally. Um, and I know Rachel does not like to be told that she's strong or brave, and grief is something we all have to carry alone and discover in our own sense. Um, to hear Rachel's story at the beginning and how she was processing her grief to now and having a little podcast about it where we talk about grief, I feel like a lot. She and I talk about grief often, if not on a recording format, we're texting each other about it. And as I learn and talk to more grievers, to put your grief out there on display, for hoping to help other people, if some type of like, silver lining or shining good thing is to come from something so bad, then hopefully it is to help other grievers the way we needed help in our early days. But when you put your experience out there and your grief journey out there, it's also open to criticism. And she is so brave in that sense that people have some hot takes and people have some interesting things to say about her own experience and her own grief, and she handles it so well with grace and class, and also continuing that conversation around how do we talk about grief with each other. This is not something they teach you. This is not something we've learned as children on how to support one another. And I think through your podcast, other podcasts that we've been on, other resources that we found, the books we read, hopefully we're adding to this larger collective to make a more educated society around grief. And if it's one little way that we're doing that in our community to help people, for one, give them a space for support, but then two, beginning to further educate people. How do people who've never experienced grief support a griever? How do grievers support other grievers? That's a whole nother thing of like dealing with your own heavy emotions again. How do you deal with grief after grief after grief? Because it's not like you go through one experience and it's done. You keep going, like life keeps on going, and you keep having to deal with really good times and really bad times. So I know just through Rachel, she's very open-minded about a lot of grief experiences and such a warm energy to bring into a space. And I feel that talking to her as a friend, but also in the support group on the podcast, her DMs with other people as they begin to like try to understand their own grief. Try and find yourself a Rachel. Maybe not the whole world come after her. She's only one person. She can only do so much. But there's other people out there who are strong in their space. So that's what I gotta say.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Rachel? When you first met Kendel and this friendship was starting to blossom, like what were the qualities that were just magnetic for you?
I mean, I think early on, because I asked Kendel if she wanted to do a podcast, I think maybe after like the third dinner party meetup. Wow. So at that point, we probably knew each other like 2 months, but like we didn't really have like one-on-one conversations until I asked if she wanted to make a creative podcast with me. And I think a part of it was first, like on her profile, she said something similar of like, my dad passed away at the time, it was like 4 years ago, and I'm in a place to talk about it and also like help other people with my grief journey. And it wasn't something that we like set up in there. Like when she joined, you're meeting a bunch of strangers and you're sharing and you're trying to have prompts and tell people, encourage them to share. And a lot of people are very hesitant to share. Even like, almost a year in, a lot of people are still hesitant to share, that you have to like break the ice. It's a lot of energy to lead a room when people like clam up, even after talking and, creating that kind of support with each other, a comfortability. It still happens. And what happened in the group is like, I would say something and then I'd like have to share my story to open people up. And Kendel would always be the person that would go next. And so that helped create like this way in the group that, okay, once Kendel did it, then other people would start to share their stories. And that wasn't like something we discussed. It's just like, it's what happened. And so I was like, oh, okay, I feel like we already have kind of like that thing going already where we're like sharing, we're stepping up to like help the support group. And so it was something early on. I was like, okay, this just makes it much easier because no one is stepping up besides Kendel to be the next person to share. And it's like, you can only share so much about one situation by yourself, being like,
Yeah.
okay, this isn't like the Rachel share your sad stories to a bunch of people group, you know? That I'm only sharing this much because no one's talking, you know, like that type of thing. And so it was super helpful that Kendel just automatically did that. And when I reached out to her, she said like yes right away. And the first time we actually like talked one-on-one, I think we talked for like 5 hours or something. Like
Wow.
we literally just like kept talking, and we talked about like grief and life and just random stuff. And whenever we do just like sit down and talk, we just keep talking until like Jameson tells me it's too long or something. Like Jameson's my dog. And we'll just, you know, be talking about everything. And I think it's just something that we got along really well. And we've only met in person one time, and it just happened that she had a work conference in the Bay Area. And so of course I was like, oh, like you can stay at my apartment and whatever. And it was just funny because our coworkers were like, are you going to die? Like you're someone you met off the internet. You're going to stay at her apartment. And I was like, well, when you say it like that, it does sound a little sketchy, but it just felt so normal. Like, obviously if you're coming, like, of course, stay with me, you know, like let's go do a bunch of things. And so it was just so funny. And when we met, it wasn't like awkward or anything. It was like, I already know Kendel, you know, like we got along so well. We did a bunch of stuff, you know, took her to as many places I could in like a day and a half, you know, we didn't have much time. And yeah, it just felt so natural to like have her around and to spend time together. And Kendall's very much the person that's like very thoughtful. Like she's the person that's going to send you gift baskets. And like, she was at my apartment one time for like a day and a half. And I think it was for Christmas. Like in her package, she sent me like a candle that she saw on my table and like remembered it, and then got me like a bigger version of the candle as part of the Christmas gift.
That's
and like
beautiful.
That's just how Kendel is. Like she's very thoughtful and very like sincere, and she does those things that reminds me, like I feel like I almost turned off that part of my brain in a sense, because the people that I did that for was really like my sister and my mom and the most. And that's who I also received it from. So it's like you're like, you care less. So you're like, okay, I'm turning off that piece of my brain that like you overdo it for people, and like not everyone deserves that amount of love from you. Not saying they don't deserve it, period, but maybe not from you because they're also not going to give it back to you. But Kendall's that type of person that like, and I was like, okay, it reminds me to like take the time to show people that you care, and like that stuff is so nice. And so that's the kind of person like Kendel is. Like she really notices stuff and will like say it and share it. And you just need those friends that like notice those things about you and will share it and like mention those things, and are very thoughtful, because not everyone's kind of like so self-absorbed with their own lives nowadays, and that happens. And I think it's nice to just friends remind you like, okay, it is nice to care. It's important to care, and you feel better about it when you do. So like take the time to actually do that. And so I think that's been a really nice thing of having Kendall's. It's like we get each other in such a deep way because of our grief and like how bad that feels, but also just like the type of friendship and things that's like, it reminds me so much of things that I've been missing. And so it's like nice to have like a Kendall that like is like that. Like, okay, it is nice. And then you don't have to be so like hardened by the world to not like be that person that you were before grief. And it is also a hard thing of like, who am I after grief? And like did we lose Kendall?
I think so. Oh no. This was so beautiful what you were sharing.
She'll come back. Oh, I'll finish it up since Kendall wasn't talking for that. But yeah, it's just nice to have like a Kendall that like reminds you, because I think I have a hard time figuring out like what is life before, like who are you after grief, and who is your personality, and like just like how are you going to be, because it's so much of my personality was tied to people that are no longer here. And so figuring out parts that I don't no longer express of myself, or the parts that I no longer do, and that's I didn't think it mattered anymore. I think it's important to like figuring out like what is important to you as this new version of yourself. And I'm still figuring it out. And a lot of work has just been done in like the last like year, you know, it's it's been like a very like, okay, now I'm really figuring a lot of things out that I wasn't thinking about because I was just like not accepting it. So Yeah, it's just been a whirlwind of those emotions. See if like Kendall's texting me. Let's see.
Yeah, I think you hit such a good point too of like it is just so interesting how you just feel like a totally different person after loss, and it's just like some friendships are just gonna last and make it through with you, but some just aren't, because you really do become a new person.
Yeah. And to figure out what that is
Yeah.
hard.
So for like for grievers, maybe supporting grievers, or if someone's listening that's not experienced loss but they're looking to support another, I'm just curious, like, what does kind of like day by day or week by week support look like between the two of you? Because you have such a beautiful friendship, and I'd just love to hear like what that looks like for you guys personally.
I think for myself and learning how to be a better grief advocate, but also just a better friend within grief, and that's like an own personal pursuit. I can honestly look back prior to losing my dad and prior to like starting this grief journey that I was not a really good grief supporter, and I had to be kind of honest in that with myself, being like, oh, I said everything you shouldn't have said. I did everything you probably shouldn't have done. You know, I was probably the epitome of like the awful support someone would expect. And so really trying to pivot that and be like, okay, with my own experience, I am now more aware of this whole other world of sadness and complex emotions grievers experience. And I can help people who may or may not have any grief experience at all, how to be better support. I think one is I have a horrible memory for dates, birthdays, everything. And to start with, meeting Rachel, like the days of their birthdays and their losses are important to her. Her birthday is important because it's in the middle of like all the losses of her family. And so I just made like a calendar note in my calendar. Like I may not remember this in my day-to-day, but having something to remind me and alert me like, hey, this is a time period that Rachel's going to be like really in the thick of it. Like February is not a good month for her. It is very like emotional and very griefy. And so just being like tuned into that and being like, okay, if she's not feeling like 100%, like I have grace towards that because I'm like, oh yeah, this is a heavy month for her. She's going through a lot of like emotional turmoil. Holidays are kind of the same way. I think if people are expecting grievers, especially we had a whole holiday series and it was almost very exploratory for ourselves and our emotions around the holidays. And there was things that I had no clue that Rachel was going through, and we have similar experiences. And vice versa. She was like, wow, I never thought about it in that context before until you said it. And she's like, now I get why there's grievers that feel this way. And so for an example, around the holidays, if your griever is kind of pissed off at the world because they're not, you know, all red and green and throwing out happiness everywhere, it's probably because they're really missing their family or they're really missing the person they lost. And that's a heavy feeling to dissect when you look around at families gathering and there's a lot of joy. And have to reckon, you're like, oh, I'm feeling jealousy or I'm feeling really depressed or I'm feeling very anxious about it. Rachel and I try to give a little like, here's some tips on how to navigate that. You know, the holidays is almost like if there's like 3 months of the year you have to kind of prep for. I try to this doesn't have really much to do with grief, but Rachel is Filipina, and so we talking about her culture and talking about how that lends itself to grief. And I like went in digging to learn more about Filipino culture because I didn't know anything. I don't know many Filipino people. I know being from Texas, there's a lot of culture here, but very different than Rachel's experience of her family. And so I was like researching the history of the Philippines, and now I have ads showing up for Filipino businesses. So I'm like, maybe Rachel will like this chocolate bar that's Filipino inspired. So we joke that like I'm supporting all these Filipino small businesses. But like, if that's a small thing that helps her feel seen, that's like the bare minimum I can do. You know, like that's just a little act to show, like a little act of kindness to show, like we share a grief experience together, but I can also acknowledge like her grief is different and she has to carry that alone. I can't go in and carry that grief for her, but I can come in and be like, I can help you with that burden. If talking about things helps with that, and that's not just for the sake of Rachel as an isolated experience, that's, I think, for many grievers. Rachel has done that for me many times of having conversations about my dad that I haven't shared with people before, because she was like, I know what it's like to lose a dad, and I know that feeling. And I might share it with other people, but they're like, I would say we were culturally, as an American society, we were a little like grief desensitized or death desensitized. But when you experience loss and grief, it becomes real, and you're like, oh my God, this could happen to anybody at any time. So I think like coming down to the root and the core of it, of realizing like we all have this life right now. And one thing I have learned specifically through Rachel, and it's been a value add to my perspective on life, is that you can be grieving and you can be experiencing profound sadness and anger and confusion. And I was really wrestling a lot with my belief and my faith, and living in Texas, that's really difficult. But meeting Rachel, she always comes back to the point of like, you can still have joy in your life. And something that's simple just turned something on in my brain of like, yeah, every griever still deserves joy. We deserve to seek joy and to create joy in our lives. And it's going to look different than it did prior to our losses, when it may have come easier and naturally, and we didn't acknowledge joy as it happened because it was just happiness happening. Now we have to kind of cultivate our own joy. But Rachel bringing that up, I think about that so much now that I wish somebody told me that earlier, is like, you may have to create your own joy, but it still is there. And it can coexist with your grief and your sadness. And that's okay. It's going to be something you'll have to navigate. And it's hard at times. I would not say I'm not a happy person every single day. But this pursuit of still trying to find joy and create joy in my life, because I'm still worthy of that. I'm still worthy of love and joy, even though I thought I would never experience it after the loss of my dad. So even just that, like learning that from Rachel's perspective, changed my whole way I see my own grief.
Yeah, you're so right. We are so deserving of joy and happiness again. And a lot of times we don't think we are, but I think when you're in the thick of it too, I agree, you never think it will return, but we do deserve that. And it's like the one thing to hold on to hope to, just like, I can experience joy again. That's so powerful. What about you, Rachel? Like, what does kind of day in, day out support look like on your end?
Yeah, I think it's just having someone that like acknowledges your grief, and like Kendall's like very reflective, and she like really, like I said, like she's very thoughtful. And I think it's an interesting and a new thing for me to like have people that are kind of like walking in your grief journey with you.
Yeah.
And understanding like, then this month is really hard, or like I want to be more active or supportive for somebody during like a very hard month, or just like talking and sharing. And I think that is like new for me, because I always kept that very separate. So it is like such a nice thing to just have somebody that's like also looking out for the days that are hard for you, and like also looking out for those moments, and like just trying to be very thoughtful and there for you. I think that is like something very just new for me, because I wasn't sharing. And after a while, people that haven't experienced grief assume that you're no longer experiencing grief, or that it's no longer a big thing. And so giving grief the space that it deserves in the sense of my life, of like, it's really hard and I have a hard time with it, and sometimes are harder. Like Kendel mentioned the holiday series, like I feel like we went into that feeling like, oh, it's going to be a very happy series. We want to help people because grief is really hard during the holidays. And then I think in the end, it kind of became a time where like we really sat with our feelings about the holidays, and we're like, oh, I didn't even realize I felt like that about the holidays. Or like we cried a lot during the holidays. And I think I cried the most maybe during the holidays this past year than I had in like many years, because I really like, we talked through so many of our feelings about the holidays, and talked through so many moments about what we missed and what's hard and all the stuff, that I was like, oh my God, like I really, my feelings were like way more upfront and way more like, I was just like, oh, okay, I actually sat with them and like talked about it. And so having someone to do that with, and like you feel comfortable just like sharing stories and learning from each other, and like acknowledging when someone's like helped you or something that they think. And I think sometimes it's like people don't always even do that, acknowledge when someone's helped them or taught them something, or for some reason people don't always like giving people their flowers when they deserve it or whatever. And I think we've always been like very thoughtful of like, okay, you really helped me with this, or like I learned from this, or we're not like, we're very gracious with that. We're not someone like, oh, this is all my own, or I did this, that's not who we are. So I think just like, it's just having someone to walk with that journey is like so important, because it is very lonely, it's isolating, and you feel like nobody gets it, and no one will like get it exactly, like no one will exactly get your experience, but someone that just like gets how hard it is and like gets a good portion of it, and just like, and even for the parts of just like not even necessarily getting the exact pain, because everyone's pain is different, but like just how painful it is, and just like how no matter the amount of years, like these days are still hard or weird or whatever, and we're all figuring it out. It's nice to just have that space and like that friendship to be like, yeah, this is a weird day or whatever, and say something and know that like it's the person that receiving it isn't going to be like awkward and not respond, or it's like I think that's what's hard sometimes with grief, is like when you open up to people, how is someone going to respond back? What are they going to say? Is it going to be that they say like, oh, you're God's strongest soldier or whatever, are they going to give you that? Are they going to be thoughtful about it? Like, you just don't know, right? With somebody new. And so I know whatever I say about my grief with Kendel, it'll be received well, and she'll have a thoughtful response back, or like understanding. And I think that's important, because I think the loneliness about grief is like something that is really hard for people. It's just like, you feel like you're the only one feeling that type of pain, and you're not. And by talking to other people and having friendships like the one me and Kendel have, I think it really opens your eyes to like, okay, I don't have to do this alone. And there are people that you can meet and friendships that you can make that will really bring so much to your life that you didn't realize that you're missing out on, and like keeping to yourself.
Yeah, that's so good. I just feel like you guys give so much hope to people, because even myself listening to this, I'm like, I gotta go get a griefy best friend right now. Like, this is so beautiful. But I feel like you guys give so much hope to people that they don't have to do this alone. And while no one can like take the weight of the grief off your shoulders, because it's like they weren't in your shoes, it's your grief. But maybe the burden can be lightened with finding people that do understand and do want to come alongside them and like lift them up when they're feeling really weak. But I just feel like you guys embody that so beautifully and give people so much hope. And I just think it's so special to hear about all of this.
Thank you.
Yeah. So before I have you guys share about kind of what's next with the podcast and things that you're excited about coming up, I would love to hear from both of you. What's like a piece of advice that you would give to someone that feels really lonely still in their grief right now? What's something you would say to encourage them?
I would say when you separate your grief off by itself, you're going to feel like two different people, and you feel like you're going to have to juggle that back and forth. Whenever and early in the grief, that's kind of what you have to do. And I get that. That's what I had to do for the time space I was in. But when I came to the realization for myself that bringing that back together so I could be my full self and my full version of who I am, including the grief, and create a positive output into the world, I don't feel so scared of my grief. I don't feel like it's this dark part of my life that I can't share with people. I'm now more open about sharing it with people. I'm more open to other people. I would say that's one of my, at work we did this like personality thing, and I'm kind of like a cheerleader. I'm a supporter. I love helping other people with whatever they're going through. And I want to be that for, say, the younger version of myself who was like, I want to talk about it, but I don't know who to share this with, and this like big pain. And so when I began to unify the grief part into my life again and be like, it's a sad part of my life, but it is what it is. And talking about my grief is in some sense the legacy I get to carry on of the love I have with my dad. Sorry about the train.
No worries.
But now I feel more at ease with my grief, and that I can be a positive receptor to other people's grief, even if they feel like it's heavy and scary and a burden to them, and they're like, who wants to listen to me cry? I do. The whole last season, we just had people on and talk about their grief, and I was like emotionally moved with all of them, and that I do want to be the person that can receive other people's grief and be like, I'm here. I see it and I accept it, and you're not a less than person for having gone through a horrible experience in your life. We will all go through this. This unfortunately is something everybody in this world is going to go through. And I want to help make that conversation easier and better for people who are grieving.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You truly are, as Rachel said, you are so thoughtful, so kind, so considerate.
Oh,
such a beautiful trait. Such a beautiful trait. What about you, Rachel? What's something, like a piece of advice you'd give to someone that feels very lonely right now?
I think one, it's like that is a very relatable feeling. I think a lot of people are feeling lonely, not just in their grief, but just in life. I think, social media and internet, like it makes people feel connected, but then also very disconnected. And, even like I'll say like something I always bring up is like picking up someone from the airport is something so simple that people don't do anymore in a lot of cases, because like Uber and Lyft and now all the like Waymos and whatever exist, it's not something that people do for each other anymore. It's something, another disconnect, but it's like, it's really nice to be picked up from the airport. It's really nice to do that for somebody, like it's not the end of the world to pick like somebody up from the airport. Right. If there's so many things that are making people feel more lonely in general without even maybe realizing how lonely those things feel. Like, oh, no one's going to here to pick me up from the airport. And it's like, oh, my sister would always pick me up, or my mom, like those things you're like, oh, but they're no longer here. Right. You almost like stop thinking about how those things make you feel like lonely, because you're like, oh, I just always call an Uber anyway, and you disconnect like the human aspect of what made you feel really happy to return home or to be, picked up by somebody and feel that love. Like there's so many things that make you feel lonely now. But I think it's important to think of like, okay, I'm sure there's also a lot of people that are feeling that, whether it's like, okay, so you're feeling lonely. Is it a grief support group that you need to like join a group or something? Or if it's something like, even in my city, and the reason why I was just like, I'm not doing enough to like have fun in my own city and meet enough people in my city. So many friends live across the Bay Area. And if you're familiar with the Bay Area, it's like very big. And it's hard to plan things when people are all over. Everyone's 45 minutes, an hour plus away from each other. It's hard to be like, okay, let's all meet here on this one time. Like it's a lot more planning than just being like, oh, hey, it's a nice day. Let's go do this thing, or let's go for a walk or whatever with people in your city. And so I started organizing, like Kendel said, like I started organizing volleyball and just like having outdoor, and so it became a space where like not only I made friends, but other people started making friends. Just like a space like, okay, let's play volleyball. We'll do it on the weekends. And so a lot of people just started showing up and making friends. And now I play volleyball all the time. Like I played volleyball yesterday and made more friends. Like it's just a space to like put yourself out there. And I think we're only as lonely as we keep ourselves, because there's always going to be somebody that gets you. It might not even be like your own friends that get you now, or maybe you're not giving them a chance to get to know you or to be there for you or whatever, because you didn't want to put that on them. It's like, you don't know. There's always people out there that do want to connect. And so I think just like you have to like take that step to find your community, whether it's like you join a book club or you join a whatever club. And it's not the first, it might not be the first one. Like I said, like I joined a grief support group and wasn't a fit, but I just did another one. I ended up creating my own. Like sometimes you need to do that. There's always going to be a space for somebody to get you. There will always be another human being that will get you. You just have to like you have to be the person that's like letting yourself be open to meeting that people. And then also like being your true self so that someone can connect with you. Cause you don't know who's going to really get you. Cause I think it's like, especially for grief, it's like, you feel like no one gets you, but if you're also not sharing the parts that no one's going to get you if you're not sharing your grief, right? You're always going to feel like no one really understands because you're not telling them. And if you're appearing fine, then people are gonna be like, she's fine. I think it's like putting yourself in a space to be open and share, and then meeting people that get that or understand you. So I think there's always opportunities to meet people. I do think that there is like a loneliness epidemic, and people are trying to fix that by, I see a lot more community events and stuff happening now. So I think it's like, you may be lonely now, but you don't have to be. So like, put yourself out there, join something. If you like run clubs, I hate running, so I would never join one, but like if you like run clubs, go join that, like people are like, it's a new dating app. So like, I would never want a man to think I want to go running with him. So no, I'm not going to do that. But there's like, I don't want it to confuse him, think I'm a runner. No. But it's like, you can do stuff, right? Like there's always things to do to meet people and to socialize and whatever. And I think you just like the fear of rejection or working out or whatever, or not working out, like not everyone's going to be your cup of tea. Not everyone you're going to get along with. Not everyone you're going to like. Not everyone you're going to connect with. Like, that's fine. It's actually really hard to find people that you really connect with, but it's so much better when you do. It's like, I say it's like the Goldilocks of things. Like you just keep trying until you find your people, until you find the things that make you happy to whatever. And I think that's part of like healing with grief, is like, you have to find the things that fill your life up again, because so much gets taken from you. Like it's just an ongoing process. So if you're feeling like lonely right now, like just, I hope you find like this podcast or our podcast or whatever, or like socials, and like find community there, because you can find community in the comments. There's people that get it, that share. Yeah. So just like start finding your community, because my last year looks so different than this year. And that's from like me making active choices and doing a bunch of different things. Yeah. But my life would have looked so much more bland. I would say like way more like black and white, like gray, if I hadn't decided like, okay, I need to make some changes and start doing it. So last year, I'd say like there was a lot of like loneliness that I was feeling because of not having a bunch of people in the city and just not talking about my grief. And so by changing that, I just feel so much better. So like, I can really understand that feeling, but like do something, like just make one small step to try to change something about it. And you'll never know like how they'll ricochet you to maybe build confidence to keep trying other things. So you don't have to stay there.
Yeah, take action. It's hard to do some days when you're like really feeling the weight. It really is, but it truly can change everything. I think that's so powerful. Well, what is coming up for you guys with the podcast? I want to hear about it, and I want you to share about how everyone can find you.
So our podcast right now, we're in between season 2 and 3. We just wrapped up season 2. Season 3, we're still figuring out what we want that to look like. We've been focusing a lot on like finding the joy and like providing resources of like, okay, you're not just recent from grief, but you're trying to live a good life with your grief.
Yeah.
So we want our season 3 to reflect that more. We haven't figured that out yet, just quite yet. But we are posting regularly on our Griefy Girls book club. And on that podcast, we have a book of the month where we choose a different book. Kendall's will be more like grief centric. I'd say like more brain thought provoking. Mine are like romance, griefy books. So you get a good mix of books. And then we also just talk about like books that we're going to be reading. We just love books in general. And I think they're healing in their own way, whether it's through a grief story or just like a book that makes you feel like take you out of the world for a second. So we're going to be doing more episodes about just like sharing book reviews and sharing, you know, things we're excited to read and different grief books that we're getting. So we're going to be doing some fun episodes and then some book of the month club episodes, or book club picks. So that one is still going on. But we're going to announce when our season 3 is once we figure out those exactly how we want it to look. So that's TBD. But you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. It's all under Griefy Girls, or no, 2 Girls with Grief pod. And then the same for the book club is Griefy Girls Book Club is where you can find us. And we also have a Substack, which is 2 Girls with Grief pod.
Okay, I love it.
There as well.
I love it. You guys are on all the channels, pumping out all the content.
So doing a lot with that.
Yes. Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah, but it's amazing. It's powerful stuff. And I know it's just such a great resource to people who need it most in their grief. Really cool stuff. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining today on the Grief City podcast. And we'll talk soon.